the ritual room. Hidden deep within the forest outside of town, there's an old abandoned mental asylum known as Blackwood Asylum. Decades ago, it was the site of horrific experiments and dark rituals leading to its closure. Now, the asylum is a crumbling ruin, its halls echoing with the screams of the patients who died there. The most feared part of the asylum is the ritual room, where it's said that a doctor-turned-cult leader performed ghastly rites to summon entities from another dimension. Mark, an urban explorer with a fascination for the macabre, decides to investigate Blackwood Asylum, lured by rumors of the ritual room. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, he ventures into the asylum late one night, the cold air biting at his skin. The building is in a state of decay, the walls covered in mold and the floorboards creaking with every step. As he makes his way through the dark, winding corridors, Mark begins to feel a growing sense of unease. Strange symbols are scrawled on the walls, and he finds remnants of old medical equipment, rusted and broken. The deeper he goes, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes, as if the very air is thick with the memories of the suffering that took place there. Mark finally finds the ritual room, hidden behind a heavy, rusted door. The room is dark and cold, the walls lined with strange symbols and old, blood-stained altars. In the center of the room, a large circular table is surrounded by candles that have long since burned out. As Mark steps closer to the table, his flashlight flickers, and he feels a sudden chill run down his spine. The air in the room grows heavy, and Mark hears a low, guttural chanting coming from the shadows. The symbols on the walls begin to glow with a sickly green light, and the room seems to warp and shift around him. The table in the center of the room begins to move, rotating slowly as if powered by an unseen force. Mark's flashlight dies, plunging him into darkness. In the pitch-black room, Mark hears the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. The chanting grows louder, more intense, and Mark realizes with horror that he's not alone. The entities that the cult once tried to summon have been waiting, trapped between worlds, and now they have found a way through. The air in the room crackles with energy, and Mark feels something cold and wet wrap around his ankle, dragging him towards the center of the room. He struggles to break free, but the force is too strong. The last thing he sees before he's pulled into the void is the table splitting open, revealing a dark, swirling portal at its center. Mark's camera falls to the ground, the lens cracked, and the room goes silent. The next day, the asylum is found abandoned, but the ritual room is gone, replaced by a solid wall with no trace of a door. Mark is never seen again, but his camera is discovered in the forest, the last photo showing the ritual room, with something dark and monstrous emerging from the portal. The Cursed Carnival. Sam had always been the type of boy who craved adventure. In the sleepy village where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen, he yearned for something more, something beyond the mundane routine of daily life. So when the traveling carnival rolled into town one foggy evening, its garish lights flickering in the distance, Sam's curiosity got the better of him. The villagers were suspicious of the carnival, whispering among themselves that it was cursed, that those who entered never returned the same. But Sam dismissed their warnings as silly superstitions, too eager to experience the thrill of the unknown. That night, after his parents had gone to bed, Sam slipped out of the house and made his way towards the carnival. The fog was thick, clinging to the ground like a living thing, and the further he went, the more the village seemed to disappear behind him. The music from the carnival floated through the mist, eerie and distorted, and the laughter of the few people there had an edge to it that made Sam's skin prickle. But he pressed on, his excitement outweighing the growing unease in his gut. As Sam reached the carnival, he noticed that something was off. The lights, which should have been bright and inviting, flickered weakly, as though struggling to stay alive. The rides moved with an agonizing slowness, creaking and groaning as if they were ancient, worn down by time. The workers, dressed in faded costumes, watched him with hollow eyes, their smiles plastered on their pale faces, but devoid of any warmth or joy. Despite the creeping sense of dread, Sam found himself drawn to a large tent at the center of the carnival. A sign above its entrance reading, "Enter if you dare." Without hesitation, Sam pushed aside the heavy canvas flap and stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the music outside cut off abruptly, leaving him in an eerie silence. The inside of the tent was dimly lit, with only a few flickering candles casting long, wavering shadows across the room. In the center of the tent stood a circle of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of Sam. As he moved closer, Sam realized that the reflections were not simply showing his current self. They were showing what he could have been, what he might have become if he had made different choices in life. One mirror showed him as a successful businessman, dressed in a sharp suit with a confident smile. Another showed him as a renowned artist, his hands stained with paint and his eyes alight with passion. But there were darker reflections too, versions of himself twisted by anger, consumed by greed, or hollowed out by despair. Sam's heart raced as he turned from one mirror to the next, the images more vivid and real with each passing moment. Suddenly, the reflections began to move on their own, stepping out of the mirrors and surrounding him. They closed in, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, their faces twisted into cruel smiles. Panicking, Sam backed away, only to find that the tent walls had vanished, leaving him trapped in a maze of mirrors and endless reflections. Everywhere he looked, his own face stared back at him, each expression more sinister than the last. The carnival workers appeared around him, their gaunt faces illuminated by the flickering candles, their smiles now predatory. "You must choose," one of the workers said, his voice low and cold. "Choose one of the reflections to replace you in the real world." Sam's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of twisted game? But the worker's eyes bore into him, and he knew he had no choice. His gaze flicked from one reflection to another, searching for the one that seemed the most normal, the least dangerous. Finally, he spotted it. A version of himself that looked just like him, no obvious distortions or twisted expressions. It was the closest thing to normal he could find. Taking a deep breath, Sam stepped towards the reflection, his hand outstretched. But as soon as his fingers brushed against the mirror's surface, the reflection's face twisted into a grotesque grin. The grin widened, stretching unnaturally across its face as it reached out and grabbed Sam's wrist, pulling him into the mirror with a force that knocked the wind out of him. The world around him spun and warped, colors bleeding together into a nightmarish blur. When the spinning stopped, Sam found himself in a twisted version of the carnival, where everything was wrong. The lights were dark and flickering, the rides creaked and groaned like the dying, and the workers' faces were now hideous, distorted masks of their former selves. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the sounds of laughter had turned to wails of despair. Sam pounded on the mirror's surface trying to break free, but it was like striking solid stone. On the other side, his reflection, now no longer just a reflection, stepped out into the real world, stretching and flexing its limbs as if it had just woken from a long sleep. It turned to look at Sam, its grin now a full, mocking sneer, before it walked away, leaving Sam trapped in the nightmarish carnival. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find the carnival gone, leaving behind no trace except for the eerie silence that lingered in the air. Sam's parents soon noticed that their son wasn't quite the same. He seemed colder, more distant, with a strange glint in his eye that they couldn't quite place. But by then, it was too late to do anything about it. The real Sam was lost forever in the cursed carnival, trapped in a twisted world where reality and nightmare were one and the same. And as the cursed carnival moved on to its next destination, it carried with it the echoes of the souls it had claimed, leaving only darkness and despair in its wake. The Silent Choir. In a small town with a deep religious history, there is an old church that stands abandoned. The church was once known for its grand choir, whose voices were said to be so beautiful they could move anyone to tears. But after a tragic event during a midnight mass, the church was closed and the choir was never heard again. Maggie, a young woman who has recently moved to the town, is drawn to the old church. She's always been intrigued by the supernatural and loves visiting haunted places. One night, she decides to explore the church, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous silent choir. As she walks through the crumbling nave, she hears faint whispers echoing from the walls, like distant voices struggling to be heard. The atmosphere is thick with dust and the scent of old, decaying wood. Maggie approaches the choir loft, her heart pounding with anticipation. The air grows colder, and she hears the faint sound of singing, ethereal and haunting, as if the choir is still there, trapped between worlds. As Maggie steps into the choir loft, she's struck by the beauty of the voices, but something feels off. The singing is mesmerizing, pulling her deeper into a trance. Suddenly, the voices grow louder, more intense, and Maggie realizes that the choir isn't just singing. They're screaming. The ghostly figures of the choir members begin to materialize around her, their faces twisted in agony, their mouths open wide in eternal silent screams. The church begins to shake, and the stained glass windows shatter, the fragments hanging in the air as if time itself has stopped. Maggie tries to run, but the floor beneath her cracks open, revealing a dark, bottomless pit filled with the tortured souls of the choir. The voices crescendo, begging for release, for someone to break the curse that binds them to the church. Maggie stumbles and falls into the pit, her body suspended in the void as the voices close in around her. The choir's leader, a ghostly figure in tattered robes, appears before her, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He explains that the choir was cursed during the midnight mass after they unwittingly sang a hymn that invoked an ancient, malevolent spirit. The only way to free them is for someone to take their place. Desperate to escape, Maggie tries to plead for mercy, But the leader shakes his head, his expression filled with regret. The choir members reach out to her, their cold hands pulling her down into the darkness. As she vanishes into the void, the voices of the silent choir finally fall silent. The church is left in ruins, but the townspeople begin to notice a new voice among the whispers that echo from the walls. A voice that sounds eerily like Maggie's.